Right, Connor, I want to start with some feedback we've had from the podcast that you have not yet heard.
Yeah, exciting. Do it live.
I think it was last
Sure, it's
week.
been dismal, huh?
Yeah.
Are we quitting? Are we closing the doors?
Yeah, we got absolutely hammered. No. So last week we asked for a little bit of feedback, and we actually got some. And I'm reading this to you for the first time. A couple of it was from emails, a couple were from YouTube comments. So, and the reason I'm reading this out is not to toot our own trumpet. It's to encourage others to send feedback, not just saying how great we are. If you want to say that, that's fine. But also, please do send your thoughts on the new format. And any kind of suggestions you have, any suggestions for guests, ideas, whatever, to nick@glampytech.com. So just the first piece of feedback I got on an email today actually was, I think I can say his name, Bill Nolan.
Nice.
Thank you, Bill. Do you know Bill?
I do know Bill.
Oh,
this is the
okay.
floating cabins up on Lake Erie.
Yeah.
Lake Erie.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, they're great.
He said, keep up the great work. The hands-on/hands-off episode. Sorry, that was actually Jacob Helverson's episode, so can't take the credit for that one. Was a great listen, and I love the new format. Ray Kennedy, Bill's business partner, love the new format and the very educated questions from you and Connor. Rachel, I'm going to butcher this name, Bratch, who is a regular YouTube commenter. Thank you, Rachel. We really do appreciate it. On the Big Gnarl episode, which you can claim some credit for, Connor, she said, the music bit had me cracking up. Thanks again for the treasure box of gems. And Jason Gilead, also on YouTube, commenting on that episode, saying this was really inspiring to watch. Keep creating content. So the only problem I have with all of those reviews is there's absolutely no constructive criticism. So please do give us constructive criticism. You don't have to praise anymore. But thank you for the feedback, and please do send it in. Today we've got another Nick P on the pod. It's Nick Parker, who is a friend of us both, I would say.
It's going to be a Nick nightmare.
Yeah,
and I can't even say Nick P because that doesn't.
Yeah, it's so hard to coordinate meetings with me and Nick Parker for obvious reasons. But Nick is a money guy.
Yeah. And a great money guy to know if you're listening to this podcast. Probably the best money guy to know if you're an aspiring entrepreneur. And the main reason for that being the work that they do with the SBA, the Small Business Administration.
Yeah, so I mean, Nick heads up the outdoor hospitality division for Live Oak Bank. And again, Nick is a previous guest. We'll link his previous episode in the description. But Live Oak are a bank that pride themselves on operating all across the US, not just in a local region. And they have really grown their outdoor hospitality division in recent times and really adapted to the world of glamping. And Nick himself has done great work into kind of networking with the community, and he is one of the leading figures on the financing side of the outdoor hospitality world. He's seen, like you, Connor, he's seen a ton of projects come through his door. He knows what to look for in these kind of applications for financing, and there'll be a lot of people listening to this who are looking for financing or investment for their outdoor hospitality projects. So what we're going to be doing, we're going to be talking about 3 specific projects that Live Oak and Sage, Connor's company, have worked on. Maybe what they did right. Well, they've all been pretty successful. So what they did right, and more importantly, what the audience can emulate or learn from if they do their own financing application. But also, this is a money-focused episode, but there are some great principles here that Nick's looking for what makes a great project, and even if you're not applying for funds, then there's some principles here that you can take away to make your project a sounder and kind of give it the best possible chance of success. So I'm looking forward to having Nick on. Connor, you know Nick very well.
Yeah, and I'm particularly excited about this format. At grad school, we did case studies. That's how we did all of our learning. And it's an amazing way to learn and really take tangible stories and start to do kind of pattern recognition and apply it to your own journey. And we spoke with these clients, got their permission to chat about their projects. So thank you. Thank you to all of them. So who are, letting us talk about their journey for the betterment of the community and the industry as a whole. But it's very helpful to see, and hear about specifically what certain projects did well and what they really executed on and what was a strength for them. And then what were some of the snags or the difficulties or the challenges, so that, you can learn from those and hopefully make your process of getting to the finish line a little smoother.
Amazing. Here's Nick. And we're live. Connor, why is it so difficult to raise capital in the glamping and unique stay space?
There's a number of reasons. I think probably the most difficult reason is that it's a new space, it's a new sector, and it's poorly understood by a lot of traditional banks, investors, institutional investors, and that's because there's not a lot of great historical financials for people to look at and reference. A lot of properties have been operating for less than 10, certainly less than 5 years. So there's just not a lot of historical evidence about the performance and the financials. And so I think, and just the wide degree of variability between the projects in terms of how remote they can be and how different the unit types or level of quality. So it's really kind of the Wild West from an investment perspective. And I think also what can make it difficult for operators, particularly entrepreneurs, is there's a couple really core skill sets that you need to successfully launch a glamping business. The first one is kind of surrounding real estate and finding good real estate, and then the construction. So understanding how construction and permitting work, and then the other aspects of advertising and marketing, getting a beautiful and functional website set up with social media and email lists and SEO and all of that. And then the day-to-day operations. So checking guests in and out, turning over a bunch of different units that might be far apart from each other, bookings. And then you need to know the day-to-day financials. And so oftentimes entrepreneurs who come to us, will be lucky if they have one or two of those 3 or 4 main skill sets. And it really takes a lot of expertise to do this. Sometimes entrepreneurs will have none of those, main 3 or 4 buckets of skill sets. So that can be a concern or a difficulty from a lender's perspective as well. So I think those are kind of the main 2 things. It takes a lot, and then it's just a poorly understood industry, and that's what makes it really tough.
Yeah, and we are going to discuss a little bit today kind of just how many skills are required to get into this business, and how having background in those skills really can help, for example, an application for financing for these projects. But Nick Parker, welcome back to the Money Man. How did you rate Connor's answer there? Anything to add? Anything he was wrong about?
No, I mean, I think he's spot on. I think the other thing that people think about in terms of the investment, it can often take a long time to get your money back. These things, you're talking about construction, and then they ramp up slowly. You can be looking at 2, 3, 4 years before a property gets stabilized. And often, if you're looking for outside investment, which many folks are, that can be a long time for an investor to get paid back. So it's kind of got to be, I don't want to say a passion project, because there is another side of it. Like you get to that return, but it takes a longer time. So you have to have patient capital. You have to have someone who buys into your vision. And to Connor's point, there's so much variety. We're going to talk about 3 different projects today. And even within this glamping sector, these are very, very different projects from a budget perspective, from a borrower background perspective, from a market perspective. So, from one project to another, it's hard to find things that look and feel the same. Where in other asset classes, you can look at the Star Report and see what, Marriott does in Dallas and what a Marriott does in Denver, or, whatever. In these asset classes that are a little bit more standardized, or this, can be, to Connor's point, a bit more of the Wild West. And part of it is that it's new. Like, it's kind of a newer idea. It's a newer concept. We obviously all believe it's here to stay, but, there's a learning curve kind of happening in the industry. Folks coming into it who maybe think it's easier than it is. Like, how hard can it be operating 10 units, right? Like, I can figure that out. And then you find out, well, like, okay, now I'm accounting, now I'm HR, now I'm sales, now I'm operations, and it can be pretty overwhelming. And you find that maybe it's not as easy as it was sitting around our kitchen table talking about it when we're actually going to execute. And then I think on top of that, we'll talk about it, but like the reality is things are expensive right now. Construction's expensive, land's expensive, debt is expensive. So making the math work, can be difficult. People fall in love with these projects, which of course they should, and of course that's great, but it's a math problem at the end of the day. These are businesses. Folks are making investments. Folks are financing these things. That aspect of it has to make sense and has to work. So I think when you add all those things up, I think that's why it can be a long road. And then you add in zoning, you add in entitlement, folks who are under contract on pieces of land for 2 years trying to fight that fight. It can be tough out there for sure.
Oh, I was just going to say, Nick Parker, you have one of my favorite quotes in regards when looking at opportunities, and that is, math is undefeated. And, we're both in the business of doing projections, and you can't stress how important that is. And until you do real, you might think a property is wonderful, and you look qualitatively at an opportunity and it seems like a home run. But it's not until you really put pencil to paper or, fill out your Excel spreadsheet and really project out the numbers that you could really know, or at least have an idea. They're still projections, but it's so critical. And I love that saying. So
yeah, well, you mentioned obviously glamping is much newer. Hotels have obviously been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And there's a lot more infrastructure around those in terms of, you said the STAR report, for example. You can see a lot of the data, but hopefully Sage is going some way to remedying that. But do you think in, let's say, 20 years, this glamping / unique stay borderline case industry will be easy to raise capital in?
I think it'll be easier. I think it'll be more well understood. I think there'll be standards, and like the big guys are coming, right? You look at Hilton, Marriott, like the fact that they're investing in these properties and investing in these partnerships with these glamping opportunities, it is becoming more institutionalized. I think, like anything, there will always be a mom and pop component to it, and part of that is what makes it really special. And maybe mom and pop in 10 years looks different than it does today. Maybe that means you just own 2 properties instead of 50, right? Who knows? But I think it'll continue to get, we're learning, right? We're one of the few banks in the country who kind of plants our flag and says, hey, we do this, right? Whether you're in Texas or you're in California, right? We can finance your project. And we've only been doing it 2-3 years, so I think there will be more, knowledge available. We're continuing to learn. Our credit team, we're growing a portfolio every day. We'll have our own data. And I think, that'll just continue to kind of build on itself, hopefully, is the idea. I think that the idea is here to stay. The concept's here to stay. There'll be winners and losers, but I think it should get easier over time.
Last time you were on, we spent most of the episode really discussing the 3 kind of primary debt instruments for raising capital for a glamping development specifically. Sure. SBA loans, USDA loans, and conventional loans. And we want to keep this to kind of 3 or 4 minutes if we can in this episode, because if anyone does want to know the specifics of those instruments, then please do go back and listen to it. But can you just, for those who didn't listen and can't be bothered to go back and listen, just recap the 3 main instruments: SBA loans, USDA loans, and conventional loans?
Yeah, happy to. I think, our kind of primary weapon, and especially in the glamping space, and really, that'll be reflected in the projects we talk about today, is the SBA. So, when we talk about those 3 products, I don't want it to be misconstrued that they're all kind of like equal proportion of what we're doing. The SBA definitely carries the weight, especially in this space. It's the perfect product for opportunities, 1 million to 10, which is the vast majority of what we're looking at. Certainly there are larger opportunities. That's where the conventional financing comes in. But, the SBA, you can get a little bit more aggressive in terms of the leverage. We'll lend a greater percentage of the project. They're longer term loans where, our conventional financing is a 5-year loan on a 25-year amortization, meaning at year 5, you've got to refinance that thing. The SBA loan is a 25-year loan with a 25-year term, so a little longer term thinking capital, which again we think is appropriate for this space because these investments are a little bit longer term. SBA kind of a perfect product for small business owner, that's really what the product was developed for and built for, right? Was to get capital in the hands of small business owners across America. We choose to do it in this industry, but that product is being lent to thousands of industries across the country. Live Oak, our group, we are the largest SBA lender in the country, so we certainly believe in the product and feel like it is the right product for a lot of folks. Conventional financing, there's either, hey, look, we are overqualified for SBA, right? We're just a bigger shop, we've got stronger guarantors, and we need more money. So typically we would use conventional financing like 10 million plus. So either like really big ground up development, big refinances of maybe multi-park portfolios. That is something we've looked at. And then the USDA financing, that one's kind of a beast. Again, we do it. There's some advantages to the rate offering you can get, but the requirements are definitely kind of stronger in terms of, hey, look, it's got to be located in this certain community. It has to meet these certain standards. So I would say that's like, 5 to 10% of our portfolio, if that. So, we have it as a weapon. We have it as a tool if for whatever reason the SBA and the conventional piece don't work. But definitely the majority of our financing is through the SBA, followed by conventional, followed by USDA. But I think for most folks listening to this, the SBA is probably the path.
Mm-hmm. And I guess for context for the viewers, how many projects do you think you've looked at and gone through their applications or their projections, and how many sites do you think you've visited as well, just so the audience has an idea of kind of your pedigree?
I'm sure I've looked at somewhere between 50 to 100, maybe more, to what level of detail I got into each one of those. Obviously, the ones we funded and closed or got into commitment letter, we've been heavily involved in, deep into every single detail. But in terms of the conversations, countless, a couple hundred. So we've looked at a lot of opportunities all across the country. Site visits, probably 30, 40, sites we've been on, and whether that's an operating property, whether that's raw land, somewhere in between. So, boots on the ground. We go see every deal that we're going to close at Live Oak Bank. So that's something we're really proud of. We think it's really important. We're based in Wilmington, North Carolina, but lending across the country. But we really view these as relationships, and we think about it that way, and we treat it that way. So I want to be able, in good faith, to my credit team, say, no, I met with Connor. No, we walked that site. He knows his stuff. I met with the contractor, right? We talked through the numbers. We talked about, his background. And then likewise, we really want the borrower to feel like they've got a teammate in Live Oak Bank, right? That when something goes wrong or something goes right, it's not, let's call the Live Oak Bank hotline, right? It's like, I'm going to call Nick. I'm going to call my direct relationship manager. We're really proud of that. I think that's an important part of who we are. It's kind of who we've always been. Our mantra, if you will, is treat every customer like the only customer. So, we've spent a lot of time directly in this industry.
And I can certainly vouch for that. I think there's a big thing to be said for smart money, whether that's on the traditional bank lending side or private investor side. And that basically means that whoever's putting into your project, hopefully they're bringing more expertise and more network than just the dollars. And I think Live Oak really does that due to your kind of vertical specialization and kind of your network. And, working with partners like Live Oak, they're probably going to be able to bring a lot of knowledge and strategy to help you, refine the best concept that's going to protect you and make sure you have a profitable investment, as well as introduce you to some partners that can probably help you, make your business a success.
Yeah, and I think in this industry, this can be really tough conversations because these things are like labors of love and they're passion projects. And, it's like I'm putting my heart and soul into this thing. And sometimes the answer is no. You're missing something here, or, you're not prepared to take on something of this scale and scope. And no can be the hard answer, but sometimes the hard answer is the right answer, right? So, I think that, again, we don't want to be the yes man. We want to say, we want to set you up for success. And I always try to make the equation or, the connection. It's like, I'm not lending money to Boeing, right? It's not like this big corp, I'm lending money to Connor. And if Connor goes down, there are real implications to that, right? So if we get that wrong, you could, you're losing your retirement. You might lose your home. There's you're real implications to getting this wrong. So the worst thing we can do is set somebody up to be unsuccessful. And hopefully our time in the industry, we're going to say like, hey, maybe you're not thinking through the ramp up the right way. Maybe you need to get that zoning report before you start putting real money down. Things that just by time in the industry, we can say, I think you might need a third-party manager on this property. This thing is probably a little bit bigger than you're ready for. Oh, by the way, we know 5 of the best. I can make those connections directly. So hopefully the time in the industry and the vertical specialization, is felt through the customer, that you're not explaining your business to us.
Is there a reason that comes up time and time again for having to turn down these kind of projects?
I think the biggest thing is the math, right? Like, your project does not support your budget, or you are not able to put in enough cash or find enough investment to offset what you have to borrow to make the deal work. Oftentimes, why we lean on Connor and Sage so much, these are very much projection-based deals often. It's, hey, we're going to build something net new, so there's no operating history. There's no existing financials for us to look at. It's very much the case, especially in glamping. And the borrower thinks it's going to make $1 million year one, and in reality, it's going to make $500,000. And, having that conversation to say, like, I know you believe in it, but we've looked at 50 of these things and none of them perform the way you are telling me this thing's going to perform. And you probably need to know that, because that debt payment's going to be very real. And, you need to be able to make that comfortably without, worrying, hey, how did we get this so wrong? We're 3 months in, and maybe reviews are great and maybe occupancy is pretty good, right? But we're behind because we didn't think through, hey, giving ourselves enough runway, giving ourselves enough leash to get this thing where it needs to be.
To Connor's point, you're bringing in that kind of expertise where they might not have considered the run rate or any of the kind of the time centric cash flows. Like, they might have just thought, okay, well, I'll make this much this year, I'll make that much next year, without realizing that they might actually run out of money at some point. So I think having someone, as Connor said, if you can find an investor who adds to your expertise, then that's massive. Also, even if the investor or the bank says no, you're learning something there, because you're learning, okay, what you didn't get right in your projections. So I think the other thing to mention as well is like the down payment required. You're not going to get $1 million loan without putting something down.
Sure.
And we're both working on a deal with a lovely lady in Texas who's probably listening to this. And she will do it. She's had to work very, very hard to do it, but she's just about to bridge the gap between the money she needs to put down versus the rest of the loan that Live Oak are providing. But I think we need to remind people that you do need some kind of cash or some kind of equity to put down to be able to secure a loan for something like this. It's not like the Live Oak aren't, unfortunately, the silver bullet, or neither is any kind of bank that's going to provide you anything.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two sides to that, right? First is, again, making the math work. The less you borrow, the less debt you have to service, right? So that's pretty fundamental and pretty elementary. The other thing too is like showing, hey, look, we are fully committed to this thing. It's not someone else's money that we're putting in, which, of course, is oftentimes somewhat of that equity contribution, right? There are outside investors, but the story we really like is like, I've been saving for 10 years, 5 years, 2 years, whatever, and this is my real money going into this thing. So if, again, I've got real skin in the game, to me, I'm like, you are going to fight to make this thing work. You're going to dig in. You are going to work late, get up early. You're going to go to the trade shows. You're going to figure it out. So that's certainly a big component of it.
Again, the main point the main idea of today's episode is to add a little bit of colour to these specific financing discussions, and that's by discussing specific projects that we've or that you two have worked on generally together as well. And we're going to kind of introduce the concepts of each project. We're not going to be, name the names, but we've got the different states that they're in. And it's more just to kind of, Nick's provided some notes on some of the good things about those projects, what they got right with their applications, and kind of, talk specifically about those projects, but also how those kind of good points about those projects can apply to the audience's projects as well. Not just around raising money, but also in generally having a pretty sound development that's got the best possible chance of success. So we're going to go straight into it. The first project being the one in Missouri. So Nick, can you just explain what the concept of that project is, and what kind of financing they went for and how much money, or the total development budget.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of preface it. The reason we chose these three today, all right, these are ones that Live Oak Bank either financed or is in the process of financing, and then Sage completed the feasibility study. So a really nice kind of cross section of Connor's expertise in looking through the deal, and then our ability to execute on the financing component. But yeah, this first one was a really neat one. It's kind of a hybrid opportunity, where they are going to have an RV component and a glamping component. I think they said 50 RV sites and maybe 20 odd, kind of a mixed accommodations between tents and park models and some different things. But the story on this one, so it's in Branson, Missouri. They found a really unique piece of property that was actually a former campground. I think probably built in the 60s or 70s. Had not been operational for the past 5-10 years, something like that. But had the zoning right because it had kind of been grandfathered in as an RV park. Had some of these existing infrastructure, like roads, some of the existing utilities. Obviously, a lot of that had to be redone. But it was really cool because when we went on that site visit, even though, it had not been operational for, 10 plus years, to be able to walk the site and kind of get a feel for it and see it because some of that had already been carved was really special. So this was, rounding, call it a $5 million project all in. I think we financed 80% of it. So the borrowers had to come in with that 20%. This was one where, husband and wife were kind of the primary owners and drivers, but they did have investors involved in it and equity partners, which certainly helped get it to approval with our team. This was kind of a newer venture for these guys. They certainly had a really applicable and unique skill set, kind of came from a world of commercial real estate. It had short-term rentals, some multifamily, things like that. This was kind of their first venture into outdoor hospitality. But also along the way, while a different industry, our borrower was, an existing small business owner. They had kind of like a retail background. And even though sometimes you say, okay, well, like that is not outdoor hospitality, and it's not, when I take a step back, I'm like, well, what do you do in any business ownership, right? You're in sales, you're in HR, right? You're in management. You are working with your CPA, you're working on taxes, right? Just like all the different skill sets that have to come together to, at the end of the day, be a business owner, right? And I think that you're rarely going to find someone who says, like, what's your background? Be like, I own 5 glamping, parks. And it's just kind of not where we are in the industry. I think that will happen, because if we turn down everybody who didn't have direct hospitality or direct glamping experience, we probably wouldn't do many deals. So yeah, these guys just had a really kind of cool story and really sold us on the vision in terms of the park.
How important is having some kind of background in some kind of tangential space?
I mean, I think it's critical, right? Like you have to be able to sell yourself. You have to say, I've done something along the way to show you, bank, that I am qualified, prepared, ready. I have the skill set, or, I have the people around me to help supplement maybe what I lack. Some folks will come and say, hey, look, I'm a really good developer, but I know that I don't know how to manage these things. I know that, so I'm going to pull in third-party management. So that wasn't the case with these guys. They're going to self-manage, and again, through giving us an extremely detailed business plan, giving us an extremely detailed financial model. You could tell they had poured over the details, that they're not going to figure it out on the fly, right? Like this was a real business decision. There was a lot of thought. They had went and raised real money. So just being able to demonstrate, based on what you're doing, and it's all kind of scale and scope based, right? The next project we're going to talk about is different than this one, where it required probably less of that because it's a smaller scale, where these guys are going to have, some 70, 80 units, right? Between RV spots and cabins. And that's a lot to manage, right? They're going to have retail. They're going to have, a coffee shop on site. So there's going to be some F&B. They're going to have a pool. They're going to have these different amenities. It's think 20 acres, right? So it's a lot of land to manage. Like all of these things, you've got to be able to show us that there's a lot of different components going on here. And they were able to do that, right? Like when I walked the site, you ask them, okay, what's your marketing plan? It's like, well, here's my person. Here's what we're doing already. Here's the steps we're going to take. Here's the budget. Okay, great. What's your HR plan? We're going to have this staff member. We're going to pay him this. We're going to find him here. They had really demonstrated to us, okay, we know what we're talking about. We're not going to try to figure this out along the way. And some of it you will figure out along the way because that's the risk, right? That's the jump. We're in the risk game. We're making a bet on these folks, but an educated bet based on, hey, they've really done their homework.
So if there is a blind spot, say if someone doesn't have any real estate background, it sounds like if you can convince on enough other points, or if you can make up for that in some way by, for example, being extremely detail oriented and showing that you've thought through every possible aspect of the project. If they're working with someone like Live Oak Bank, as opposed to say someone who has super strict requirements that is like you have to have relevant experience, can you make up for like those kind of blind spots?
Yeah, I think you can, and just like anything, it's all relative, right? If you're trying to borrow $1 million to build 5 units, we're probably willing to take that leap with you as opposed to you coming to us to say, we're going to build 200 units, and that's going to be our first foray into this thing. That's probably more than we're going to be willing to risk, right? That is probably operationally too much. You're going to have too many staff members. You're going to have too many guests. You're going to have too many problems. We're not going to probably take that first jump with you there. So I do think it's all relative, but certainly I like folks who have said, well, I've been to the 10 competitors in the area and I've stated all of them. Here's what I liked. Here's what I didn't. I've talked to 10 consultants. I've been to every show, right? I already know who my reservation software company would be, right? I know who my marketing agency would be. So maybe if you don't have that background, but you can show us, like, anybody can learn, So if you've demonstrated to us, I've kind of put in the work, then yeah, we're going to be far more open to making that decision.
I think one thing that's can be a red flag for me when we're working with entrepreneurs, one, exactly what you said. It's amazing when the entrepreneur has gone and done their research, stayed at the comps in the area, because that's fundamental. That should honestly be like step one when you're researching a market, is to go visit the comps online and then go visit them in person, and ideally sleep there. And one thing that always, when I look back, that always gives me a bit of concern is when someone says they're going to be better than all the comps in the market, and some of those comps are pretty good.
Yeah.
And maybe they will, and maybe they have a huge budget, but that isn't always the case. And I think being realistic about where you'll come in your market position, be like, oh, we think we're going to be better than these 3, but not as good as these 2. So we think our rates and occupancy and performance is going to come in somewhere in between, and having like a real, just showing that they're realistic about their approach and their offering.
And realism is the word there, from what Nick was saying earlier, is about, if you have no previous experience, it sounds like, okay, don't bother going for a 200 unit site, start small and build on it. Whereas if you do have, a great background, if you've got a background in glamping or development or something, it sounds like you can be a little bit more ambitious. And banks and investors want to see that you have an understanding of your own level of competence and experience as well.
Yeah, I was going to say a couple other things these guys, just demonstrated to us, and that I always am impressed with, is their feasibility, or the feasibility study that we got from Sage, lined up not identically, but very close to their own projections, right? And that always shows me like these guys are dialed in. They know what they're doing in terms of like, here's a realistic margin, here's a realistic ramp up, here's a realistic occupancy, here's realistic rates. And anytime you get on a phone and you say, like, let's pull up your model, let's pull up your projections, and you try to poke holes in it, right? The lender, and they've got backup and ammunition. And even if you have a difference of opinion, there's not a line item on there. They're not like, well, here's why. And even if we have a different opinion, like, it just shows me, I've spent a lot of time on this personally. I really know the numbers. I know the business. So that was really impressive. And then just something I'll share about these guys that I think is really cool that they've done along the way. So they are kind of wrapping up construction now, preparing to open, and they have done an incredible job marketing this thing before it even opened, right? They have built this, like, I think they have maybe 2,000 plus followers on Instagram, I think even more on Facebook, before they've ever opened. And they've kind of let people inside, showing them the journey, right? Here's where we started. Here's the day the pool went in, right? Here's the day the old clubhouse went down. Here's the day the new clubhouse went up. And here's the challenges we've run into as small business owners. Here's our best day. Here's our worst day. And made it feel really real, which obviously resonates with people. And they're building support from their potential customers, from their peer group, from folks who want to learn from them, and kind of like have already established themselves as thought leaders in the space just by being so transparent and so open. And what that will ultimately lead to, right, is like they are going to have direct bookings. People are going to find them because they're going to want to seek them out, instead of booking them through your Airbnbs or whatever and paying the percent on that, right? Like everybody's goal should be direct bookings, and these guys are going to generate that through really thoughtful hard work, really creative marketing that, has not been incredibly expensive. They're filming it themselves on their own iPhones and posting it on their own Instagrams. They're just really being scrappy about it and being really smart about it. So that's just kind of a cool thing I've noticed about these guys, which is not surprising because, again, we made the bet on them to start this thing. So the fact that they're exceeding our expectations and crushing it, great. Like that hopefully is validating the fact that we made a good decision on these guys.
Yeah. And a couple of things I'd like to point out about our analysis and the feasibility study. So, Branson, Missouri is on Table Rock Lake, I think it's called. It's fairly remote. So when we looked at the population access, it's pretty small. It's only about 3 million people within 3 hours and relatively low median household income. But the big reason why we were okay with that is because they're a couple blocks from Table Rock Lake. And that brings in 1.2 million annual visitors, which, holds a candle with, top 10 national parks. And so that's really bringing the demand and the need for people wanting to visit this lake, and they're going to need a place to stay. So we know that attraction is doing a lot of the heavy lifting as far as bringing in demand, and they're a solution that is in close proximity. Another thing I'd like to distinguish with this one that is a really important in this industry, and this might warrant our own podcast episode later, Nick Perslow, and that is, this is an RV resort that offers glamping. And it's what we would call mixed use. And in our line of work, we have a very important, and we only realized this in the last 2 years, because before we used to kind of all lump it together, but our important delineation is this a glamping only resort that is a real professionalized hospitality or unique stay experience? Or is this a campground / RV resort that is also offering some glamping units? And those are very different. And we should probably have a full episode to talk about this, but essentially it's a very different customer experience. And that is if you have, a safari tent or a dome that's on your campground, it's going to be a very different experience and price point than if you have a safari tent or dome on a property and it's just those. And what we've noticed is sometimes there can be a pretty big price ceiling on glamping units at an RV resort. And the reason for that is you're coming in and you might be staying at a nice dome, but you could be across the meadow from, an RV site or a campground. And it's just not quite the same elevated experience that guests are looking for. So that's something to be really important to be aware of is, if we were in this market and say this client wanted to put safari tents on their property, which I think they did, we wouldn't use Under Canvas as a comp because Under Canvas might get $250, $300, $400 a night. But if we put those exact same safari tents on an RV resort campground, it might be closer to $150, maybe $200, just because of, the nature of the property.
How are those guys balancing that in terms of, is it glamping on one side of the property, RV parks on the other? Is it merged? What does it feel like an RV park? Does it feel like a glamp site? What's the balance?
Well, Nick Parker, you've been to the property, so maybe you could answer this and then I could dive in with how I might segment it in my mind.
Yeah, I'd say a couple things, right? Like, I'll let them define their own park, I don't think that's our job to do. I think that's their right as small business owners. We can have our opinions. I think they'll make it work. I think they try to be as thoughtful as you can, right, in terms of trying to bifurcate and separate. And, everything is done with the guest experience in mind from the RV owner and then from the folks staying in the glamping site. I think, Connor's exactly right. When you have that mixed use, you're not going to probably hold yourself out to be or make yourself out to be under canvas. It's a different animal. But yeah, I think they were being as thoughtful as they could. One of the other things I liked about these guys and gave us a lot of comfort is when we first went out there to meet them, they had already established a relationship with their general contractor, even before this deal was approved. And when we walked the site, he was there for every step of it to provide his perspective. And I was just super impressed with how aligned he was. Our borrowers were with their general contractor to say, hey, didn't we say that, septic was going here, and didn't we say the utilities were going here, and, how are we going to manage the pool? And they just really demonstrated like, hey, we're dialed in on this thing top to bottom. So I did want to mention that, not to go on a side note, but I didn't bring it up earlier, but something that really impressed me.
Well, you said, I think in your notes, because I think in the next project we're going to talk about, it's similar. The contractor and the borrower have a pretty good relationship, and you specifically said it's understated how important this is. So why is it so important that the borrower and i.e. the developer has such a good relationship with the contractor?
I mean, because things are going to go wrong, right? And like, you have to be able to have that rapport. You have to have somebody who's a professional, right? Who understands, is going to work with you, is going to communicate with you, is going to be able to communicate with the bank, because that's its own process, right? We're not just blindly giving this money away and saying, go build what you said you were going to, right? There's checks and balances along the way to make sure, hey, you said you were going to have this done with these dollars. Show us that that's done, right? Okay, you did that. Let's release these next set of dollars. And I just think, you have to have somebody who you believe can create the vision that you're going for. Timelines are very important, right? When we talk about how much interest reserve, how much working capital we build in, some of that is built on how quickly you can open. And if you tell us it's going to be a 9-month build cycle or a 12-month, it's pretty important that it's not 18. That's pretty powerful. So I think having a transparent, dialed-in contractor who can allocate the time, allocate the resources, appropriately is really important.
I can't stress enough how important it is to get, regardless of your relationship with the contractor, it's important to get the right contractor in. I've seen and heard of countless projects that have been fucked up by a terrible contractor or someone who's completely messed it up. And you can even have a good contractor and it's not relevant, because what matters as well is having an understanding of the specific units you're using as well. Because if for example, you don't connect the contractor with the manufacturer, who knows intimately how the screw piles are supposed to go in, what groundworks you need, then the contractor is going to be completely guessing. And no matter how good they are, they might overlook something that they just wouldn't know about. So A, have a good contractor, and B, hook them up with the manufacturer, so everyone is crystal clear on what's required. Because again, that's where it's actually, I've seen projects really break down and be delayed and ultimately lead to lawsuits, is because there just hasn't been that relationship set up, and people have just assumed, it'll be fine, we can do it without the instructions or without that connection, and it invariably goes terribly wrong.
And a cautionary tale, these projects certainly don't always go right, and we've worked on one together where the construction came in, it took, instead of 9 months, it took 12 months, and it came in about 20% over budget. But the big thing was the delay in their opening, and they were hoping to be open in June, and they're really not even quite open. So they missed out, and it's a highly seasonal market with the peak summer season. And so they missed out on almost all of their revenue we projected for their first peak season. And then they had even less cash, and they're in a pretty distressed scenario now. And so having someone who can give you an accurate timeline and an accurate budget is really critical. And gosh, any advice? Like, I guess I'm not even super familiar with how someone would find or know the right GC? I guess, is there some sort of tangible advice we could give the listeners for how they would find and know? I mean,
recommendations of someone you trust, I would say, is a big one. But yeah, I mean, it's difficult. I think just treating that decision with the respect it requires and the thought it requires, I think is massive, because people would just be, I'll just get some local guys in, and again, that's where things go wrong. You really have to kind of think deeply and look widely, and it's something that Travis Berube, a former guest on the podcast, said is he would get like 10 quotes from contractors, and price would be one thing you'd look at, but also there are lots of other factors that you weigh up in the decision. You don't just go for the cheapest contractor. So get as many as possible, search widely, and probably ask for recommendations. Don't ask the contractor to hand them a referral, but go outside of them and see what they say, because there are a lot of bad ones out there, I know from experience.
And so I think we talked about this on the last episode. You can look at projects submitted in your county, and I think on the application there will typically be a GC or a civil or the construction group, and they will be the ones signing off on the permit application for the construction. So if you are looking in your county or in your area, you could look at similar projects that have been approved or recently completed, and see if it looks like a good construction and it was done on time. And you could look at the application and look up that group and call them, and then you could call them to see if they know other people. So that might be one way to start to get a connection with some of these more reputable groups.
Yeah, Will Spursum recommended that method in the last episode, so do go and check that one out. On to the second project in North Carolina. So Nick, do you want to set the scene for this one?
Sure. Yeah. So kind of different scale and scope. This is a $1 million all-in project, right? So relative to the first one we talked about, $5 million. This is $1 million all in. I think we'll finance 85% of it. So the borrowers had to come in with roughly 15% of the project. So and this will only be 5 units in a phase one, right? So much smaller scale. They'll be pretty high-end units. This is one where, again, we went and saw it like every deal, and these guys, this was at maybe their 9th or 10th site they looked at, and I think that time and that due diligence was worth it, because this one was really special. Beautiful long-range views, follows this beautiful river to get there. It's outside of West Jefferson, North Carolina, which is kind of a booming little mountain town not far from Boone, North Carolina. And these guys, this is absolutely their first foray into this. They are kind of career guys, worked for kind of like technology, retail-based companies. It's very much a different venture than what they've done historically. But just like the last one, I mean, in terms of detail-oriented, doing their homework, asking the right questions, incredibly impressed with these guys. They knew their model inside and out. They know their business plan inside and out. There's never a question they don't have an answer to, or something that, hey, we know we've got to figure that out, and here's what we're doing to do that. So really, really impressive. And this is one too where, because it's only 5 units and because it'll be fairly low touch, there won't be anybody checking them in necessarily. Much of that will be automated. These guys are going to continue to keep their careers where they get, paid well, and use a third-party management company to help manage the property. They're 2 hours away, so, very easily can and will be there often. So we like that aspect of it. We're very confident, these guys are not going to forget about their property up in the mountains, right? Like, the passion and commitment has been really impressive. But that's nice, that, okay, these guys are going to continue to make really nice outside money to allow this thing to ramp up slowly. They're not counting on taking a check from this thing to support their lifestyle or pay their mortgage, right? And because it's only 5 units, and because, we feel really confident with the management company they've found and their ability to manage the manager and stay on top of it, we think that kind of, even if it's a slower ramp up, that'll be fine. That these guys are not servicing this massive amount of debt. It's very manageable. So yeah, really excited about this one.
In your notes, you use the term scrappy to define the borrowers. Is that a good or a bad thing?
Yeah, definitely good. Again, and I think I put it in my notes too, like one of the examples, I was up there on site with them and I said, you've got this beautiful mountain setting, it's really peaceful up here. You guys planning on offering, fires or firewood? And he walked me through the 5 different iterations of which firewood, maybe we'll deliver it, maybe we'll have them buy it, maybe we'll have it set up for them. And here's all the math that comes with that, right? Should we build it into the pricing? Should that be an add-on? I mean, and that was this small of a piece of his business model, and he had thought through it 15 different ways, right? Like, these guys are not falling into this, right? They had done their homework, they had put in the time, they had put in the money. Again, they said no, or, either it didn't work out or the offer wasn't accepted on, 5 to 9 other properties, something like that, throughout the North Carolina mountains before finding this one. So it was clear to me they had put in the work. We started this conversation months and months ago. They missed out on a couple different properties, but along the way, it was like, well, let's continue to refine. So when we do find the right property, we're ready to jump and we're ready to go. So these guys have been approved. They're actually in closing now. Had a call from this morning and just continue to show us like they know what they're doing. Say, where's the insurance? And you're like, bang, 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 bang. What's going on with title? Bang, 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 bang. What's going on with your contractor? Here's our next steps. Here's what we're doing. They've just really shown us like they are on top of it, which continues to just give us confidence in them and in the project.
Hi, friends. This is your host, Connor Schwab at Sage Outdoor Advisory. If you're launching an outdoor hospitality project like glamping, we can help. We offer feasibility studies and appraisals. What that means is we look at your specific market and proposed business offering and complete an in-depth analysis and financial projections to make sure that your planned business will be profitable. Getting the second opinion on your proposal and forecasted financials is critical to understand before you spend years of your time and hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is particularly important if you are looking to raise money for your project from a bank or private investors. They are going to want to see this type of in-depth analysis from an independent third-party specialist in the industry. We have completed over 250 feasibility studies and appraisals in outdoor hospitality in the US in the last 4 years. So we understand what it takes to bring a project from concept to reality. If this sounds like it could be helpful to you, you can go to our website, sageoutdooradvisory.com, and you can schedule a complimentary consultation with our team. Thanks. Now back to the show.
How early into the process can a borrower demonstrate that they're locked in like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything. I think it's a bit of a feel thing. There's not like a, once you get here, you've shown me you're ready. Like part of it is just in conversation with them, the questions they ask, the stories they share, how diligent their financial models are, how diligent their business plan is. And the other thing I really liked about these guys is, there's 2 borrowers on it. And it's just very clear to me they are great business partners. You can just, by spending time with them, by being on the phone with them, the way they interact with each other, the way they respect each other, I think they have complementary and different skills. One is maybe kind of more big picture visionary. The other is probably more detail oriented, kind of like in the minutia, standard operating procedure. Just very clear to me, these guys are going to work out. And, something I shared with them and something that was shared with me that, always is kind of stuck with me is, I would rather do a bad deal with a good partner than a good deal with a bad partner. I think it's that important when you are choosing who you're going to go into business with. And hopefully these guys have a good deal with a good partner, but it was just clear to me, these guys are going to figure it out. They're going to make it work. Had a lot of confidence there.
Well, a bit of a mentor of mine described a business partner or a business partnership as marriage without the sex. Which, similar kind of principle, I suppose.
Unless it's a really messed up partner.
Yeah. I mean, these guys are putting...
I've seen some bad marriages.
These guys are putting in their family's money, right? Like they're committing to this thing, they're kind of jumping in with both feet. And you're really smart about it. They're saying, hey, look, we bought a property with room to expand, so they can easily add another 5 units to this property, and I think they're young enough to say, okay, like we want to scale this. We want to have 2, 3, 4, 5 of these things, but we're just going to show you we can do one really, really well, and we're going to learn a lot along the way, and we're going to refine as we go. And while these guys really don't have much relevant background in hospitality or really even commercial real estate, they've just shown us like we've come in and we've learned, and we've taken the time, and we're not biting off more than we can chew. We're not trying to have 50 units out of the gate and a $10 million project, right? We recognize that like this is enough and this is a place to start and we can grow from here. And I think, that was impressive.
Well, it's the realism that we mentioned earlier. It's understanding your limits to start with and planning accordingly.
Yeah, and I think that shows the sign of a business owner, right? Like they kind of had that awareness going in, that this is probably what bankable looks like. This is what we can handle by keeping our current careers. We feel like we can manage this. So yeah, I've just been really impressed with these guys, and even though it's a smaller project, it's big to them. So it's big to us. It's we don't take it lightly that they're signing $800,000 worth of debt.
And when they were figuring out scale, you said in your notes that they aligned with you guys, the bank, pretty early on, and kind of adjusted their scale accordingly. What did that actually look like?
Yeah, I mean, they kind of came to us and started with like a hypothetical business, not a hypothetical business model, but just saying, okay, the one piece we don't know is we don't know how much the land is going to cost, right? And we don't know how much, some of the expenses associated with that are going to be. But let's just say we're targeting properties between, whatever, $200,000 and $500,000, right? So we can kind of play with that a little bit, and then we'll try to find something within that. But we know our construction budget would be roughly this to build 5 units. Here's what we think we could charge, and all this can be tailored, right, depending on what market we actually land on, and depending on whatever the actual site we land on. But it was just clear to me they were not going to figure it out once they found the property. They were going to have it figured out and then adjust around the property. So that was from the first conversation, I was like, it's not if, it's when. These guys are going to find a property. These guys are going to do this. It's very clear to me. And they didn't reach out to us until they were probably confident enough in that, which, again, we really respect. And we'll have a conversation with anybody, and I'm happy to spend the time with anybody, but I can only be as constructive and productive with the feedback, as you're giving me, where folks say like, I don't know, I might want 3 units and I think I got $50,000 to put into this thing. It's like, well, we can't do much with that. Like we need a little bit more if you want real constructive feedback. But these guys kind of came locked and loaded.
You also said that they have pretty good careers outside of glamping, and that not necessarily reliant on this business doing well to, for example, pay their mortgage. Is that important when you're assessing the project's viability?
It can be, right? Again, I think it all depends. It certainly is a strength of this one, to say it gives them a lot of runway, it gives them a lot of time, and it also provides more cash because they don't have to take an officer's compensation, and all of that free cash flow from the business can go to service the debt, and it can go to reinvest. And if they can take a distribution after, that's great. But I think these guys are just as interested in growing the business than they are making money off of it, right? I mean, I think you build the valuation along the way, you build, through the revenue, through the quality of the park, right? I think they're interested in the value of it, not necessarily taking a check each month. And, of course, maybe that comes down the line, of course, right? They'll learn that, right? That in 5 years, right, we can take some money out of this thing every year if we want, or we can roll that money into our second project. So it certainly helps here.
And it's kind of a backup for you guys, right? Like if a property, the math is looking really good, then maybe, and there's not a lot of uncertainty around it, which is rare, then you might feel really comfortable lending purely based off the projected cash flow of the business to service the debt. But if you're a little bit uncertain or the numbers are passable but tight, and you're like, well, we think this is going to work, but something could go wrong, then you guys at the bank know, okay, well, these guys do have some additional cash flow that can buffer that and be a backup, which I'm sure gives you guys more confidence to sleep at night.
Yeah, and like anything, I mean, back to the math is undefeated, right? If both of these guys were relying on cash flow from this business to support their lifestyles and this was going to be their full-time gig, the math would not work, right? Like they would not be able to pay their mortgages, support their families, maintain their lifestyles, two different families living off of 5 units. It just wouldn't work, but it does work when you factor in, okay, well, what are they paying for the third-party management that allows them to keep their careers? And we're confident that those can all still work harmoniously. So that was the other thing, right? Is like without that, it probably doesn't work. The math doesn't make sense, right? There's not enough money coming out of this thing to supplement and replace what they've been making historically.
The last point I want to raise on this project is you mentioned they're getting a third-party management company coming in. That sounds pretty unusual for a 5-unit project.
Yeah, I think it can be, right? But again, with them being 2 hours away, not really able to relocate given, having successful careers, that was really kind of the option that they felt made the most sense. And they're building the business in a way that those are cohesive, right? They're building it with automation. They're building it to say, okay, yes, there's going to be somebody you can call if something breaks. That is kind of part of what comes with that third-party management company. And they actually went with somebody who's more local in terms of the third-party management company who really has more of a focus on short-term rentals, almost like Airbnbs. But for these guys, with only having 5 units, and there's some shared, like fire pits and hot tubs and saunas and things like that, like, amenities, but they don't have to manage a pool. They don't have a store. There's no F&B. Really all of the things that, can and should be managed can be done through that company. While again, allowing them to work their 9-to-5 jobs, be up theirs on the weekends if they want. So it really kind of made sense for this one. And we had to get comfortable with that third-party management company and learn who they were. We didn't have a background with them prior. They're not like one of the bigger outdoor hospitality third-party management companies, because this one, smaller scale, smaller scope, it probably wouldn't even make sense for some of those groups. But, these guys identified these guys, made the case for them, were able to teach us who they were, and that's how we got comfortable with it.
And I think what was really interesting about this project is that it was really more of a short-term vacation rental, unique stay type project, and not really a hospitality kind of hotel type model. Mm-hmm. So like you guys were saying, low touch, primarily using Airbnb and OTAs and VRBO. And that changes a lot of things about the project. And they have a property management rental business that is their third party management. So someone who would be traditionally managing vacation homes, and that type of scenario. So a little bit of a different beast, but you can use, local guys for that model.
Yeah. And the tech stack helps as well with, reducing staffing requirements. Like Ben Wolf, who probably everyone listening to this podcast by now knows, his site and Era has minimal on-site staff, and he did that by having a really sharp tech stack that automated a lot of processes, and then he also has the remote staff in the Philippines to answer kind of guest inquiries and things like that. And there is someone there again to fix any issues or anything like that, but there's no on-site check-in or anything like that. And so getting a real good tech stack can reduce those requirements, particularly for those small projects where the numbers may be a little bit iffy. If you have like 3 staff on site for 5 units, the numbers might not add up. So I think investing in a proper tech stack and making sure there are lots of automations and maybe even the off-site remote kind of Philippine staff is possibly the way to go for those kind of projects as well.
Yeah, and I think interesting in this one, like if you look at a lot of the traditional kind of larger players in like the RV park space, they make 6 to 8% top line revenue, give or take, something in that world. Where these guys, this management company is going to take like 15 to 20. Again, it's like it's a big piece of the revenue, but it's what allows it to work, right? Without them, they didn't feel comfortable finding, one single general manager and kind of putting it all on their feet and all on their shoes, right? They really wanted something more professional and organized and that had their own track record.
Yeah, and it kind of takes out the payroll line item and puts it under the management line item.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there won't be any staff. The last thing I'll say about the prior one that I think is a learning lesson is just kind of the nature of these things. They've had to extend their contract a couple times, right, with the seller who owns the land. And while that's never a fun conversation, I think they have been really thoughtful and diligent about working with that seller and creating a really strong relationship with that seller. So when that request has come through, the seller knows who's asking, right? It's okay. I know these guys. I've met their families. I know what they're building here. I know that it's just not a land purchase. So there is more to making the financing come together. There's more to getting this thing shovel ready and being ready to close. So that kind of strong relationship they've cultivated with the seller has really come in handy. And I think they've, unsurprisingly, based on who these guys are, have been really diligent and thoughtful about that, which has really paid off and provided a lot of grace through that kind of open communication.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because there are ultimately a lot of bullshitters. There are a lot of tire kickers in this industry, and doing the due diligence to make sure on both sides, from the seller's perspective, but also the developer's perspective, that you can trust the other person, that maybe there will be a little bit of leeway if something doesn't go to plan. If they didn't have that rapport and the seller didn't trust them, then they might have told them to do one when they requested the extension a couple of times. So I think that's a great point that I don't think we really covered on the pod yet.
Well, the seller's been really kind of patient with that. Where a lot of sellers would say like, no, your money goes hard this date, and we're not bending on that. Oh, and by the way, and if you're not able to close in another 2 weeks, we're going to need another $50,000 down payment, $100,000 down payment, because the seller's kind of got you. But again, because they've built this relationship, the seller's been really patient and kind of accommodating, willing to work with them, which I think is important.
Project 3 in Maine.
Ellsworth, Maine. All right, so this is all three of these projects are cool. This one in Ellsworth, Maine's probably just a very exciting one. It's a treehouse resort going in Ellsworth, 20 to 30 minutes from the entrance to Acadia National Park. This is a group of 3 guys who approached us for a feasibility study. And I think 2 of the 3 or all 3 of them are engineers. And talk about, detailed. They really ran through a lot of the scenarios. It's an interesting market because it's such a short season historically. A lot of the major players in this market are Canvas based. So Terramore, Under Canvas, 2 of the bigger ones, and a couple others that are really only working in the summer season. And this project is going to be hardwall units, fully insulated. I think they're planning the construction cost for each of these tree houses to be, I think it was like $200,000 to $250,000 per unit. Some of them 2 bedrooms. They're all 10 to 12 feet off the ground, very well engineered on a bigger property on a riverfront, and just a really exciting piece because of the property and the space between the units and the proximity to Acadia, a big demand driver. And then one of the more kind of unique or tricky parts about the application was, what's winter demand going to be? Because winter glamping, this isn't really glamping because they're such legitimate structures. But a big question in this projection was, how is the winter demand going to be, and trying to prove that, which was difficult because not a lot of players were open in the winter. In Acadia National Parks, historically, their visitation in the winter months would go to 0 because they'd close. And I think now they're staying open in the winter, but that part certainly took some due diligence. But there's a lot of kind of highlights of this project. One is that they were very detailed in their approach. But one big lesson learned of kind of a snag that they ran into, and we've talked about how important utilities are in the horizontal infrastructure on a project. And I think originally in our feasibility study, we projected to the tune of $500,000 or $700,000 for horizontal infrastructure. And it was some things where they'd gotten a few estimates. And then 6 months later, when those were all done, that number had jumped to 1.5 million. So, they tripled in their horizontal infrastructure costs.
What was the total project budget, sorry?
I think it's right around 10 million all in.
Perfect.
Yeah, I have 8.6, and then maybe it went up from there.
That's
And so that was a huge lesson learned for us, and they were very diligent and engineers, and so we felt fairly confident in the number. And even despite that, they came back, construction costs came back very high, which we hear a lot of in the more recent construction climate. But it really just goes to show how important it is to work in a buffer and work in a contingency if costs are going to come back higher. And I think one of the big intricacies of this site was there was huge spacing between the tree houses. It's one of the best parts of the project, but one of the trickiest parts of the project. And I think they only have 1 or 2 units per acre, which is going to create a phenomenal guest experience. But when you think of running utility lines and roads between all of those units, it gets pretty expensive pretty fast. And I think that was one of the just really big things to be aware of, for your project, is how far apart are these going to be, and really trying to get some granularity and firm up those horizontal infrastructure costs. I guess, Nick, do you have anything you wanted to add to just like the characteristics of that property or the process?
Yeah, I think probably one of the more special markets we've looked at. Acadia National Park is one of the probably most traveled national parks in the country, and I think all the national parks are growing, and these guys are 20 minutes from it, 30 minutes from it. So in the summer months, I'm sure they'll crush it. The property itself, I've not been on it. My colleague has been on it. Stunning, like beautiful open fall foil, trees, river, like, really, really, really special property. And, this is of the 3 we're talking about, significantly the largest budget, and I think with that, certainly challenges in terms of, okay, like we've got to start writing real checks, like big checks. And I think these guys are working through the cash flow even today with our team and figuring it out. I think we love the borrowers. We love the vision, to our comment that you kind of keep coming back to, right? Like, how do we make the math work on this thing, right? And how do you make it make sense and set you guys up to be successful? I think we've got no doubts about the market. I think we really don't have any doubts about the guys. It's just kind of making the numbers make sense. There are fewer units relative to the request, but the units are incredible. So it's a give and take there. So yeah, I think a very different one. When you start talking about a project in the 8 figures, obviously you've got to have some really substantial and significant guarantor strength, and investors who can write pretty big checks. We're still kind of figuring it out, but say we finance 70 to 75% of this thing, you're talking about $2+ million into it. That's real pretty significant money there.
Is it safe to say the bigger the project, the more confident you need to be about it, or the more reassurances you need, not just on the financial side, but also the strength of the operator and the past experience and things like that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, like, you start talking about bigger opportunities, there's more for us to lose, right? You miss, a little bit on your projections on a smaller deal, you're off this far. You miss a little bit on a big deal, you're off this far, right? And those things just compound the larger the numbers get and the bigger the debt gets. And yeah, I mean, the bank's got more to lose, right? I mean, this is 10 of the last projects we talked about all in one, so if something like this goes wrong, it's like 10 of the last deals going wrong. So yeah, certainly anytime you start talking about bigger exposures and bigger deals, the bar just continues to get raised a little bit.
Yeah, and I believe they're looking at charging $500 plus per night, and there's a lot that goes into that, and a big guest experience that needs to be crafted. So do you need to see them thinking deeply about that and what exactly they need to do to hit those kind of numbers?
Yeah, and I think just like working with Connor, help justify that. Show us that there's a track record for folks actually willing and able to pay for that. And like anything, well, not like anything, but our space especially, like, it's probably hard to find a great comp, right, for tree houses outside of Acadia National Park, right? And not only tree houses, but like super high end ornate tree houses. Like these guys are building these beautiful structures. Like they're going to end up with this incredible product. So it's probably hard to find a great comp for that, Connor. I would guess. Like
Yeah.
you can find relative things, but to show like, well, here's a new build treehouse on this pretty of a property with river frontage and 1 acre per site. A lot of that is going to be kind of educated guesses to an extent to show us like you can demonstrate that. And then when you start talking about $500-600 a night, think about who's paying that. You're gonna have a much needier guest. You're gonna have a much that kind of tolerance for bullshit and tolerance for things going wrong from your guests is much lower when they're bringing their family. And if they're renting 2 of these things, okay, now our family's out $1,200 a night. We want things to go right. And I think being able to demonstrate, okay, we can provide this experience, we can execute on this. Certainly that bar gets a little bit higher than, again, our last deal, self check-in 5 units. This is just kind of a different ball game.
Do you need to see their full operating plan with standard operating procedures to approve something like this?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think, again, if you can show us that, we certainly love it. We like the idea that, we're all kind of under the impression that you're working towards that. Part of it is, like we recognize, okay, when we approve this thing, you might not have guests for another 12 plus months. So the idea that you're going to have your final, standard operating procedures finalized, may not be realistic, but to the extent that you can show us, okay, we are really thinking through that. Like we know what responsibilities are handled by which staff member, how many staff members we're going to have, how we want folks to check in, some of those things at like high level. And then of course you can dial that down. I wouldn't say we require it, but it's like anything. If you can show us that you've done that, it's kind of another arrow to throw at the deal. So certainly we view it as a strength.
So I wanted to pull up, this was one of the really interesting and kind of tricky parts of this deal. So what I'm showing here is the Acadia National Park visitation. And what we can see is over the last 10 years, they've brought in its average 3.2 million annual visitors and more like closer to 4 since 2021. So huge demand. But what's really interesting about this is you can see in January and February, we're looking at 10 to 15,000 visitors compared to July and August, which are at 770,000 visitors. So that shows you some of the swings in seasonality and demand. So if you look at the months from November to March, so those 5 months accounted for 4% of Acadia's visitation, while the other 7 months, May to October, accounted for 94% of the visitation. So something really important to look at when projecting occupancy and projecting demand. And then we had to kind of marry that with what we were looking at for the occupancy projection. And we looked at as much as we could, and AirDNA was saying, 68% annual occupancy with 40% in December. And then Hotel was saying, 52 to 67% of 12-month occupancy. So we're trying to use those to come up with what we think the occupancy will actually be. And what I really appreciated about this client was, we had to do several rounds of modifications and revisions to the financial projections in the feasibility study. And like you guys said, it's hard to find a comp, particularly in the winter. So, three of the 4 best comps are closed in the winter. So, when Acadia and when Terramore and Under Canvas are closed, we don't know what kind of rates, they would be charging in those months. And we can't really gauge the occupancy. So then we have to look outside of that. And what I really appreciated about these clients was, when we do our feasibility study, we're going to be thorough and we're going to look deep. But one, we don't live there, and there's always going to be more information that we don't find. And so these clients brought us 4 different comps that we could use to come up with some of those winter projections. And, we maybe only ended up using one of the 4 that we thought was, really applicable and appropriate, but that still made a difference and helped kind of complete the picture that we needed. So I think that was a really good, effort on their part, was to, really be thorough. And we had a lot of conversations with them, and they brought us a lot of information, some of which, we did incorporate and use. And they found a way to make it happen despite, tripling horizontal infrastructure costs.
For audio listeners, Connor just shared his screen with lots of occupancy data for Acadia National Park. So if you want to go and watch that, then just search Unique Hospitality Podcast on YouTube, and you can get some extra bonus content. What we did discuss was the variable visitation rate across the year to Acadia National Park in Maine. And how like 6% of the visitation came in the winter. So on that point, how do you make it work when there is such swings in demand across the year in a particular market, to kind of make sure that if you're going to open year round, how do you keep the money coming in?
That's a good question. I think, for us, are you talking more operationally or more from a projection standpoint?
Well, both. Okay, well, if someone's going to submit a business plan, and they know that 6% of the visitation to the area comes in the winter, so clearly massive drop in visitation in let's call it 3-month period. Well, in this project that we're talking about, did they account for a massive dip in demand there? Did they kind of think, well, we're enough of a destination to keep it going? I'm intrigued as to kind of how you justify such a massive drop. And keep the lights on.
They were a little more optimistic than me about the winter demand, because I think they'd spent more. I've never been there in the winter, and I couldn't find things online. But I think being a local and chatting with people, you can get a better idea of what that might look like. I think what would have been an immediate red flag was if they wanted to do safari tents and they were saying, we're going to open in the operator and we're going to get occupancy and kill it. And I would immediately say, okay, Terramore and Under Canvas are not doing that. So, I would say that's a bad idea, and I don't think you're going to get anything. Fortunately, they had, very robust, unique units, and that's where they move more into kind of capitalizing on the power of Airbnb and moving more into unique stay, where I think a huge demand of this property is not Acadia. Although it's bringing a lot of people to the area, I think people will want to come stay at these units regardless of if they go to Acadia or it's open. People just want to stay in a cool treehouse and look out their window and see a beautiful river, in a nice forest. So I think they're really well done units make up for some of that lack of demand in the winter and give us a little bit more confidence. I think that kind of sums it up. Is I think the units themselves are enough of a demand in the property to make people want to go there, even when Acadia is closed.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Connor. We worked on an opportunity that we ended up financing in Wisconsin that is open year round, and it's kind of higher end, unique glamping, or not even really glamping, but kind of like this one. Each one has heating, you can really stay in them all year, hard-sided, just kind of unique accommodations. And they don't have an Acadia National Park. Like, they are pretty remote. The draw is, the property itself, and the draw is the stay, right? And kind of disconnecting and being in these unique spaces. And, while they certainly probably don't make the same amount of money in January as they do July, they are not operating at a loss in those months. And there's certainly some efficiencies in saying, okay, it's expensive to shut down, and then maybe you lose staff, right? And you have to winterize the place, and there's just expenses and kind of headaches associated with that. But if you can make it special enough that it's the draw on its own, and you can, I think, market it really well, and create a following and create a buzz that says, no, I just want to go here to be here. I think that can be enough.
Well, the other situation is the flip side, where the winter market is the market. In the ski areas, for example, obviously Posh Outdoors opened its first location in that part of the world where it obviously gets super cold, but we get the winter demand crowd because we're very close to Banff, for example. So I think it's winter glamping. Connor, I know you like to talk about it a lot, kind of winter glamping being unproven. I think we're going to see over the next few years, hopefully, we can talk about Posh being a successful example of that as time goes on. And, winter glamping doesn't always mean kind of low season glamping. There are different markets, and it'll be interesting to see how they shape up over the next few years, and hopefully we'll be creating lots of content around it.
Yeah, and I want to see how the Kananaskis property does. I think it'll kill it, and I think there's something very special and very appealing about being in this beautiful unit inside and out, and you're sat at a big window nook or in bed, and you have your cup of coffee that's steaming, and outside the snow is falling. And I think that's a special experience that I certainly want to have, and I think there's a huge market for that. It just hasn't happened as much. And then that's where I think your canvas based tents, you're going to struggle. Even if they say they're winter, winter rated, I think it's going to be difficult to convince the customer to go stay in a soft wall unit, even if you have robust heating. But if you have a traditional hard wall unit, I think you're going to have a lot less resistance.
Well, yeah, and what you mentioned about creating that kind of cozy winter feel with a hot cocoa or whatever, you have to change your marketing to suit that. So, get photos of your site in all 4 seasons, so that when it's fall, you can show the leaves on the ground. When it's winter, you have pictures of the units with snow all around them, and you can create that kind of cozy winter festive content. You can't just assume, oh, we'll be fine in the winter by posting the same pictures we post in the summer. You've got to fine tune your marketing, and I think if you don't, you're leaving a lot of money on the table.
I couldn't agree more, and that's a very important aspect that we don't really talk about too much. But if you're treating your website content, think about like a clothing store. Clothing stores change their entire website and their entire inventory 4 times per year. And usually they'll do it, a month before summer ends, they start to advertise their, fall or winter clothing, and they'll change their photos of, so if you're thinking about, if you're an outdoor hospitality operation, right now, or maybe in the next 2 weeks, you might change from a beautiful summer, out at a campfire by the river in shorts and a t-shirt. In 2 to 3 weeks, you might just start change it to someone in a scarf and a beanie, like walking through the fall leaves and those color changes. And then when you start to get into December, it starts to change to people in full winter wear, maybe snowshoeing or, nestled up inside with Coco looking out at the falling snow, and, kind of being ahead of that. So when guests come to your property, they have the confidence to be like, oh yeah, this property is intended for this fall experience or for this winter experience. And I'm not being an idiot by booking it, in the season I shouldn't be. And particularly for this location, Acadia is bringing in 700,000 people in July. Your site's going to get booked up. So you're probably going to want to put more of your marketing effort and marketing dollars towards that, 5-month low season, and really putting your dollars there.
I just got back from a property that we're in the process of kind of working through and pushing towards approval in Whitefish, Montana. And that's probably the most dramatic one that I've been to, in terms of like, they're going to deal with a ton of different, seasons, right? And dramatic changes in seasons with, real heavy snowfall. And, I was just there in the summer, beautiful summers. And I think it makes a lot of sense, right? But to Connor's point, like, also not only marketing the season, but who's coming for those seasons and why, and marketing it differently to them, right? You're probably going to get skiers in the winter. You might get older folks in the summer, right? And kind of like tailoring not only the pictures, but the experience, right? And kind of who is coming during that season, and being really thoughtful about that, and making it feel like, oh, this was built for me. This is built for what we're doing. This is perfect for what we're looking for. Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Yeah. We were wondering off mic before the show started how long we'd spend on each project. Connor said 10 minutes. I knew that would be wildly off the mark, and as has proven to be the case. So we're going to have to wrap it up here. Just to finish off, Nick, would I be correct in saying that the common thread in all 3 of these projects that have all been successful in their applications for financing, the common thread is that you like and trust the operators behind the projects?
Yeah, I think that's got to be a common thread, hopefully, in any deal that we do, right? Again, it's small business lending is kind of betting on individuals, and we don't take it lightly them betting on us. This is going to be, if not the most important decision they'll ever make in their life, one of them for many of these folks, in terms of the type of money they're borrowing and the implications behind that. I think faith in their ability to execute, faith in them, knowing what they're signing up for and being willing to dig in, should be a theme across any deal we're ever doing, I'm hoping.
Connor, any last words?
I liked what Nick said about I'd rather have a good partner in a bad deal than a bad partner in a good deal, which is really interesting. And for Sage at our feasibility studies, we don't dive into the pedigree of the client, and I think that's something that Live Oak does a little bit more, and you kind of have to. But we're looking at the deal in the market, and as Nick Parker said, you want both. And what we're doing at Sage in the feasibility study, that's the math we're talking about. That's looking at the market. It's like, do the numbers work? And obviously, that part is super important, and it's got to be both. And then I think maybe my last takeaway is just, these entrepreneurs who are, as Nick Parker calls it, they have the eye of the tiger, and that is they're going to be solutions oriented, and they're going to go to they hop on a call with us and we say, well, how about this septic cost? What's that going to cost? They'll be like, all right, well, we called 6 local contractors. 3 of them got back to us. One said 10,000, one said 15,000, another said 30. So we're projecting it's going to be 20,000 for our projects. And then next question. So like that type of attitude, I think is really important for getting your project to be a success, and that realism.
Well, you need the eye of the tiger. What a way to wrap up. Thank you both. Really appreciate it. We'll see you next week with Mike Baxter's. Oh, bollocks! I paused it up. How many have I done of these and I still paused up? Perfect. That's a wrap. There we go.